somebody sat and looked me in the eye and said, after 8 years of time, of energy, of care, of compassion, of seemingly love, he was never in love with me. And somehow still, I was trying to fix this relationship. Hey friend, welcome to my channel. And if you're a returning subscriber, welcome back. And if you're returning and you're not yet a subscriber, do that below. Since this channel is about entrepreneurship, relationships, and personal development, it's only right that I share with you the event that catapulted me into this space. The event that made me want to go hard as an entrepreneur, want to be very intentional about my relationships, and that forced me to have to work on self-development. And that is a major breakup that I went through in 2019. So for the next few weeks, I will be doing a series on heartbreak. And this series is hopefully going to help some of you who are experiencing heartbreak, who have but are still in the thick of some of the repercussions of that heartbreak, or who just want to know how you can go from seemingly having nothing and being at rock bottom and building yourself up to become a person who you would have never been if not for the difficulties that you went through. I am a woman who is doing a lot of different stuff, and I would never want anyone to think that I just woke up and got to this place, or that where I'm at and what I'm doing is something that's way too difficult or unattainable. Because if I can do it from the levels that I reached and from the struggles that I went through, there's absolutely no reason why you can't do it as well. For the rest of this episode, the first episode of the Heartbreak series, I'm going to be sharing with you the story of my heartbreak. And I am going to break this story down into 5 parts: time, complacency, support, denial, and shame. These are the 5 chapters to my heartbreak story. Let's start with time. I was in a relationship with this man from 2011 to 2019. And for those of you doing the math, I was 19 years old in 2011 and all the way until I was 27. Yeah. So 8 good years of my life. And the thing about time when it comes to a breakup is that the longer you spend in a relationship, the more committed you get to sticking it through. When I think about this relationship and the time that I spent with this person, and I look back now with hindsight and at the way things went down, part of the reason why I couldn't get out, part of the reason why I felt it necessary to stay was because I had invested so much of my time. Going from being a 19-year-old, a teenager, all the way to becoming a 27-year-old woman puts you in a situation where a lot of your formative, or if not most of my 20s were spent in the presence of this person. So I got extremely comfortable. We spent a lot of time together, and I felt like this only made sense to continue. But I'm here to tell you that don't do it. Don't look at time as a justification for why you should stay in a situation that isn't serving you. Because whether you're with that person, whether you're alone, time is going to continue to go by. And if you take time as a reason to stay, all you're doing is actually wasting more of your time. Some people look at that 8 years and consider it a loss. Some people say your time was wasted. In some ways, yes, my time was wasted, but at the same time, I believe nothing is a waste, because a lot of the information that I gathered about myself, about my life, about what I want, about what I didn't want, I wouldn't have been able to gather it if I had not spent that time. But I think what would have been a loss, and what I was really trying to do, which I'll talk about as we go through the other parts of this series, is wait and continue to stay and push it out and see it through, because I was already in it. Time keeps going whether you want it to or not. So the time that you've spent with someone, even if it's 8 years like mine, 2 years, even if it's 20 years, if you decide to take that time as justification as to why there's not better out there, why you shouldn't step out, why you shouldn't leave when you're fully being called and pushed to leave, that's the moment when you actually start to waste your time. And I see that towards the end, when things were really falling apart, I had decided to stay and continue because I felt like I had spent so much time. And the thing about this whole time discussion is that people will look at you and try to justify you staying in a relationship because of the time that you've spent with that person. I remember having people come up to me and be like, are you sure there's nothing you can do to make it work? And as we continue through this series, I'm going to tell you all the ways that I did try to make it work. But time is not a justification for staying anywhere beyond purpose or beyond what you need to do. And 8 years is a very long time to be with someone. The second part of the breakup is complacency. Being with someone, as I said, for 8 years, there are a lot of things that become commonplace. I was becoming a woman, I was moving into my own identity in the presence of somebody. And whether I want to admit it or not, that comfort of feeling like I was secure in that point of my life, in that place of my life, caused me to feel very complacent. I would say maybe 3 years prior to the relationship ending, I no longer felt happy, like truly happy. I no longer felt satisfied, and I no longer felt wanted in the relationship. I remember many times looking at my ex and telling him that I feel that if this relationship ended today, you would move on without caring. And he would look at me and hear me tell him this, and he would just say, that's not true. But lo and behold, maybe 5 months after he had told me that maybe we could still try to figure things out, he was fully engaged to somebody else. Like, my life was a Nollywood movie in the maddest way possible, but it was that complacency. I didn't feel loved. I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel appreciated. I just felt like I was going through the motions. There was no fire, there was no passion, there was none of the stuff that I used to consider important for me. But because I had been in it so long, I got complacent, and I was like, well, if this is what it's gonna be, at least I'm comfortable with it and I'm gonna stay there. And I want to tell you to never ever do that. Never get complacent, because you need to be with somebody who continues to light your fire, somebody who makes you want to do better, who makes you want to grow, someone who lets you feel like you're worthy of reaching new heights and levels. I'm not saying that this person needs to be your end all and be all. They should not be your life. They should not be the pillar on which you stand. But being in their presence must ignite a level of energy in you that makes you want to continue to grow. And I know that probably for the last 3 years of that relationship, anytime I would take my stuff to him to be like, hey, I want to do this, I want to grow in this way, he would never encourage me to do the things that I wanted to do. What he would encourage me to do would be the things that he thought was best for me based on himself. I spent my time, money, energy on him, even sometimes at the expense of myself, actually oftentimes at the expense of myself, without ever receiving reciprocity. So I was filling and giving, and he was accepting and thanking. And I'm not going to put the blame on him fully for that, because I used to be one of those lost souls who used to say, my happiness is seeing you happy. So I would do things for him and pull joy from the fact that he was happy, that he was satisfied, that he was fulfilled, and that he was growing. And I would look at the smile on his face and consider that enough justification, without ever realizing that I also deserved to be satisfied, to be taken care of, to be poured into at the level that I was pouring into him at the time when we were together. It was so bad that I literally in 8 years never told my sister, who is my best friend, about one fight that we ever had. So 8 years of a relationship, do you know what it's like to be in 8 years of a relationship and have the people closest to you think that you and that person have never been in a disagreement, when there were absolutely a lot of them? And the reason for this was because of that same complacency thing, right? Like, where I wanted it to be perceived as perfect, so I would never tell anyone that there were any problems going on. Take me as an example of what to never do, and take this story as a cautionary tale of what to never do. And I think it's important to say that, like, I'm laughing about this because it's become a story. Clearly, I've healed to a level where I'm not feeling broken by discussing this, or I'm not struggling through it, which is why I can like literally discuss this with you and smile. But trust me, there were no smiles when I was in the thick of it. The third part of this breakup story is support. I was not supported in this relationship, and I say that because at the highest and lowest moments, especially I'd say the lowest moments where I needed support, I did not receive that. I remember the day that my father passed away in January 2019. And my father was Muslim, so in the Muslim Islamic culture, you bury the dead immediately after. So he passed away on a Wednesday and his funeral was on a Thursday. And obviously for us who are in shock, our family, to have to lose a loved one and plan a funeral literally in less than 24 hours, I'd probably say 6 or 7 hours for the next morning, was extremely difficult. You know, like, this is not something that we wish on anybody. And I remember the day of my father's funeral where my ex came to the funeral, of course, with his friends who also knew my father. And we went from the mosque and we were on our way to the cemetery. And he came up to me and he said, "I've never been to a funeral before. I don't feel comfortable, so I'm not coming to the cemetery." And when I think back on that moment, at that time, I was shell shocked. So I just looked at him and I'm like, "Are you serious? Okay." And I just got in the car. And then I even felt guilty that I may have potentially been rude to someone who wasn't going to support me at my father's funeral. So I remember sending him a text in the car and being like, "It's okay if you can't come. If you feel uncomfortable, it's fine. I love you." And to think back to the fact that I could even still have that level of empathy for somebody who clearly didn't want to support me was kind of mind-blowing and a testament to, I guess, who I am. Because when I think about it, if I had a little bit more time to process, or if I had told someone, that would not have been my energy. But at the end, he ended up coming because a friend of his told him to come. And when I think back to the things that failed in this relationship, support was a really big one. I used to support him on everything. And I'm telling you this as a cautionary tale so you're not like me. I remember financing furniture for him, spending money. Like, for me, seeing someone who has a light, seeing someone who has potential, seeing someone who has dreams, I wanted to do my part in supporting him in whatever way I could. So I wanted to make life easier for him. I wanted to help him because, one, I cared for him, and two, his vision seemed worthy of the energy that I was willing to invest into it. I'm going to get a lot more into the ways that I showed him support in another episode of this series, but for now, let me just give you high level. I remember for 2 or 3 years going to his house every single Sunday after church, going to the grocery store, and then making him meal prep for the week. And I'm talking lunch and dinner meal prep. Why? Because he had a very time intensive job. Sometimes he would work 16 hours in a day or 12 hours in a day. And the struggle with working that many hours is that you don't necessarily have time to cook. So I didn't want him just eating trash or not eating, losing weight. So I decided, hey, I like to cook. I love you. I care about you. So why not just help you do this? So I would make lunch and dinners 7 days, or for 5 to 7 days a week for him, so that at least when he's going through his stressful time, all he has to do is pop some home cooked food in the microwave. And this is how I showed support. And when I needed him most, at the time of losing my dad and thereafter, he was not able to show me that same level of support. I remember less than a month after my father passed away, it was his birthday. He was actually turning 30 at the time, and I had just quit my job 2 or 3 days prior. So I had a lot of idle time, and the last thing I wanted to do at that time was be stuck in the house by myself, mourning and going through the mental processes of losing someone who you really loved and cared for. So being who I was like, "Can you give me the keys to your condo so that I can set up and plan for your birthday? You're at work anyway, I'm at home. This will be the perfect excuse, and it's also your 30th birthday." And he legit looked me in the eye and said, "I'm not giving you the key because I don't want you to think that we're in a good place." Less than a month after I lost my dad, he said that to me. To see somebody at the lowest moment in their life and not even be able to put your whatever emotions aside to show them kindness, like simple kindness in that moment, just goes to show like the type of person he was and why it's for the best that that relationship ended. If you don't feel supported in the highest moments of your life and the lowest moments of your life by people who say they love you, consider that the biggest red flag. Because it's so easy to be there for people when things are chill. It's so easy to be around for the time where it doesn't require a lot of emotional push or energy from you. But in those moments where you truly need someone, pay attention. And if that person doesn't have the emotional bandwidth to show up for you at the one moment that you need them the most, the moment that they should be able to push their stuff aside for you, take that as the fact that maybe this relationship isn't balanced. Maybe they're not there for you the way they once were, or maybe they've never been there for you like that, and this is just the first time that you're seeing it. The next part of this breakup story is denial. Things were falling apart, as you can tell. And in that February period where he literally told me, like, we're not in a good place, what did I do? I tried to fix it. I was like, why are we not in a good place? I spent money. I bought him stuff. Like, I don't even know how to get into this. I remember purchasing a record player for him, like a few days after his birthday. Valentine's Day, around there. And he had wanted one and had spoke about one for so long. And after I purchased this record player for him and we were on the phone, he started to complain. He's like, oh my gosh, I don't even know if this is going to connect to my Bose speakers. So like, this is why I wanted to buy it myself. And me being in this trauma state, and I think it's important to note that, like, I was going through a very traumatic period of my life, coupled with the addition of the one person who I thought was going to support me, pretty much telling me I ain't worth any energy. And it made it very difficult for me to be able to rationalize what's right, what's wrong, what I should take and what I shouldn't, because I was literally trying to hold on to any piece or any semblance of reality. So he was on the phone with me complaining that this record player that I had just purchased him with zero savings, mind you, because I just quit my job to pursue entrepreneurship, was maybe not going to be compatible with his PS4 or with his Bose speakers, and how that's why he wanted to purchase one himself. With all of that energy, he didn't give it back to me. He didn't say, hey, I know you just quit your job and you don't have money, and I know your financial situation, so take it back. I don't need a gift. Return it. Trust me, like the thought was enough. Instead, he kept it and sat on the phone and complained. And this whole time, I was seeing things fall apart, as I said, but I was in crazy denial. And it was up to the point where there was a moment in time where I just started to feel like we were in like this crazy limbo where I don't know whether you like me or not. I don't know whether you hate me or not. I don't know whether you care about me or not. So we had a few times where we would just be sitting in his car and hashing it out and talking and discussing. So there was a time where we sat in his car, I believe it was either April or March, where he looked me in the eye and said, I was never in love with you. You should have known that. And when I think about that now, when I think about that with my right mind, when I think about that with my self-worth intact, I'm like, was I on drugs? Like, somebody sat and looked me in the eye and said, after 8 years of time, of energy, of care, of compassion, of seemingly love, he was never in love with me. And somehow still, I was trying to fix this relationship. I was in denial. Like, it was so crazy to the point where, like, when my father passed, his family, well, his parents didn't even send me a text to wish me condolences. Yet, when he told me about how he was never in love with me, and then I also asked him, like, why did I not hear from your parents? Like, they've met me before, they know me, like, why do they not rate me? Like, he let me know that, oh, his mother hadn't been a fan of me. And I was like, okay, so for how long? And he said 3 years. And I said, 3 years, so 2016, your mother hasn't been a fan of me. You and I have been in a relationship 3 years post that. And one, you never fought for me, which goes back to the support, right? Like, if your parents don't like somebody who you truly care about, and maybe they're mischaracterizing that person, it would become your duty as somebody who knows that person in their full light to hold the responsibility of trying to bring them to understand that person. But if you don't really care about somebody, then you'll let them think whatever they want, right? So I was like, why didn't you fight for me? And if your parents haven't liked me for 3 years, what are we still doing together? Because when I look at the difference between the time when his family stopped liking me, quote unquote, and the time when we actually broke up, the only difference that had happened was his level of security. So he was an international student. We were together for so long that, God forbid, he didn't receive his papers to stay in the country, his work permit, his whatever. I, of course, would have married him. I thought we were going to get married regardless. So if I had to do an early little court wedding to make sure you're secure and safe, I would have done that, right? So at the time in 2016, when everybody wasn't feeling me, he wasn't stable. So that was the time where like things were still like getting to the place of having traction. But by 2019, he had his own place, he had his car, he had his standing in the country, he had good enough credit to no longer need my assistance. And at that point, it was like, yeah, I've never loved you. Thank you very much. And this just goes to show how people will use you. And if you're so entrenched in the concept of my joy is seeing you happy, you will literally be used to no extent. And like where the denial comes back into this is that when he told me that thing about his mom and his like parents not being a fan of me, I told you, trauma state. I'm gonna keep saying trauma state. I was so entrenched in the time that we had spent together, the amount of support I had invested, that I tried to fix it. Do you know what it is to call somebody who didn't even think you were worthy of condolences for losing your parent and apologize to them without knowing what you did? Like, I literally did not know what I did. I don't think I ever did anything wrong to these people. And I literally got on the phone, like got a calling card, beep, 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 called Nigeria and apologized. I said, hey, it's me, Toks. I just called because I wanted to apologize to you for anything I've ever done that may have made you unhappy with me. And when I think back, I think that's probably the thing that makes me saddest, because I'm like, how low did I think of myself? Like, how low did I see myself to think that I needed to really call these people and tell them that I was sorry when they didn't even think me worthy? And to even want to be attached to somebody, to want to be in a space with somebody, to do life with somebody who didn't even see me worthy of that, it's just crazy. And now looking back, I'm like, bruh, I can't fathom it. I can't imagine it. Like, I cannot imagine like where I was at that time. But that's how bad the denial was. And this denial took me months. I'd say it really fully came to a stop in May of that year. But in July of that year, he still came and met with me and told me that he wanted to go for dinner. And when we went for dinner, we had conversations, and he was like, I want you to know that I'm still trying to talk to my parents and figure things out, because part of like my trauma was the fact that I couldn't let this go, even though we were in limbo. And the limbo was so overwhelming and stressful that I got to a point in May where I was like, you have to give me a yes or no, whether you want us to be together or not. And when he said no, I said, okay, I give you 3 months from this date to come back and figure yourself out, because I know that you're still lost and you're confused. So I'm going to give you 3 months. Within that 3 months, if you have clarity, let's talk. And if not, after that 3 months, it's completely dust. So in July, which was like 2 months in, he came to me and he's like, oh, I know you gave me this timeline, but I'm still working on it. Why would you give someone a semblance of hope if 5 months later you were engaged? Is between him and his maker, because I don't get it. But at that time, I was so in denial that I couldn't see past what I thought this life was. Like, when you've been with someone so long, you start to attach your life to them. You start to see a future with them. You start to see your security with them. And when that comes crumbling down at the same time where other parts of your life are crumbling down and changing, it could really be a lot for you to come to terms with and to balance. And I was just trying to hold on to it in denial while all of this was happening. And at the same time, I'm not going to sit here and say that I was just deluded by myself. He was also showing me reasons as to why he was having an internal struggle. One of the craziest things was that he had actually asked me if I was going to be traveling to Nigeria that December. So December of 2019. When I asked him why, he said that he wanted us to have a conversation with his parents. And during that conversation, he wanted us to like talk to them and for them to get to know me. And one of the things he said to me was, I want to be engaged next year, which he was, by the way, not to me, but which he was. And when I guess in that moment of that, I had a little bit of clarity, because even though I was down and out, I realized that there's no way I was going to do that. I asked him, I was like, so you want me to pay like $2,000 for a ticket and accommodations to go to our home country? I'm Nigerian as well. To go to our home country to have a conversation with your parents. And if they say, oh, we like her now, you'll now be willing to continue this relationship, treat me well, which you haven't been doing, and propose to me. And if they say no, you'll be like, oh, well, I hope you did some touristy stuff while you were in Lagos, and all the best to you in your future endeavors. I was like, no, like, I don't deserve to be with someone who needs that much of a cosign from their parents or anyone to justify my presence in their life. And if you're with somebody who needs that and who requires that and who takes that type of advice, you're going to be puppeteered by their family for the rest of your life. And no, I have a family who loves and cares and supports me and also gives me free will. And I don't want to be with a family. I don't want to marry into a family who is tolerating me. I am too great to have to be tolerated, because I am a blessing in any and every single life that I enter into. And if you don't see that value, deuces. Like, I'm not going to be somewhere where, imagine if I went to Nigeria and we had this conversation and the parents are looking at me and they're like, oh, no, she's actually decent. I'm like, let's manage her. And he's like, okay, we're all good. I can be nice to you again. I can treat you well. And then I get on the plane. It's a 22-hour flight with the layover in the time zone. And I land in Canada and I get a bloop, bloop, a WhatsApp, a WhatsApp ding. And he goes, my parents actually decided that they still don't like you. And it's over. Like, could you imagine? Like, I don't want to be with a man who can't be a man and make the decisions for his life the way he should. And I guess that's the one place where my denial like woke up, and I'm like, yeah, that's one thing I'm not gonna do. Invest another penny into this disastrous show. And the final part of this saga is shame. And I think it's so important to talk about the shame that comes with a breakup, especially when you have been so public with your relationship, or if your relationship has been around for a long time. And that was something that I was really, really battling with throughout this whole relationship, or really just the end of the relationship. And the shame was so thick that from the time that things started to fall apart in, I'd say January, all the way until May, not one soul knew what I was going through. My family would ask about him. I'd say he's fine. I would lie. I would say that I was going to his house, but I would actually just end up like going to the mall or going somewhere else, because they would notice the pattern of the fact that I used to always go to this guy's house and now I'm not going anymore. So I would leave the house just to get out. I wasn't willing or able to tell them that, hey, this is really bad. Because if I told them that it was bad and we got back together, I knew that they would never be able to look at him in the light that I had painted him, in the good light, in the great stuff that I had shown about him. And I didn't want them to hate him or to no longer want any parts with him until I was sure that I was on the same page as them. So I lied. I held it in. It got to a place where it was so overwhelming. I had been keeping all of this a secret because of shame, also because I didn't want to be the center of attention when everybody was going through their mourning phase, right? I am the type of person who likes to be the pillar. And at that point, I was a pillar on like a shoddy foundation, because I really don't know how I was supporting people and doing the most and helping them while I was going through all of this in private. So the day it finally hit ahead was a Sunday, and I had gone to church, and that day I really didn't even want to go to church. I was planning to stay in bed and like truly just cry most of the day, and then wipe my eyes and go out and interact with my sister and mother like nothing was happening. But my sister was up and she's like, you're awake, what do you mean you don't want to go to church? And I was like, bro, now I gotta go to church. And like, shout outs to God, because I needed to be at church that day. It was such a sad day and I was on the brink of tears the whole time. And there is a lady who went to school with me, and she also goes to my church, and I call her my aunt. And for some reason, my spirit just wanted to see her. Like, I hadn't seen her in a few weeks, all of that stuff. And I go to my sister, oh my gosh, I wish I saw my aunt at church. It was the end of church, and she goes, oh, she's right there. And my sister goes to the car to wait for me, and I go to my aunt, and I give her a hug. and I immediately break down. Like my knees buckled. I was bawling uncontrollably, and she's like hugging me, and she like drags me outside of the church to the parking lot, and she's like praying into my ears as I'm like bawling. And people are probably looking at me because my church is quite big and I'm also quite inconspicuous to some extent. I don't really do much at church except for go in and get out. Like, so the people who know me, the ones who don't. So like seeing me bawling into the hands of this lady was probably really confusing for people. And I'm not the type to cause a scene, but I clearly caused a scene. And she was holding me and I was just crying and crying and crying. And then when I could finally like gasp because I was out of breath, I couldn't breathe. Like my mind was so heavy. My feet were heavy. My body was heavy. It was like a mental breakdown in real time. Like I've never experienced and never have again experienced such a thing in my life. So when I came to and the words could come out and the snot reduced, like every orifice liquid, I was able to tell her like, oh, my dad passed away in January, and like my boyfriend that you knew is doing this, he said this, and then she's like, it's okay. And then she lives about like 30 minutes from me, so she's like, on Monday, tomorrow, come to my house. So when I went to her house, we sat in my car for like 4 hours, and I just like spilled my guts, like all the weight that I had been carrying. Like she was literally the angel who came to carry all of the burdens that I shouldn't have even been carrying by myself because I had turned myself into an island. And it was after that conversation with her, when I drove to pick up my mom from work, that my mom asked me like, oh, how's X? And I'm like, we're not together anymore. And she looked like she saw a ghost. And then when I got home and my sister, I just went to her and I'm like, oh, X and I broke up. I'm like, X and I are like pretty much not together. And she's like, what? And then like they looked like they were gonna cry for me, and I think that was part of the shame part, like, right? I don't want anybody to cry for me. I don't want anybody to be sad for me. I don't want anybody to look at me with their head tilted like, poor thing. I hate to be looked at or perceived as somebody who should be pitied. And it could be an ego thing. I don't know where that stems from. That's still part of the journey that I'm trying to figure out. But I guess it comes from me always wanting to be the helper, not being able to fully absorb being the helped. So yeah, like it was a struggle. And I told them, and after that is when like my mom called the pastor, told my aunt and uncle, like all of these, my family members like really came around me and supported me, and they were like, don't ever do that again. And when I look back on it, it was so dangerous, like what I did. And don't be like me. Even if you can only find one person to confide in, who cares? If the person who you tell the truth about your life loathes the person who put you through pain, that person is worthy of any negative emotion that is felt towards them by anybody. Like I knew that he was no good. I knew that he was horrible, but I wanted to save him and protect him, even though he wasn't showing me the same energy. And I did that at the expense of my mental health. And going through mourning of a loss at that level, quitting my job and completely being out on my own to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, while also dealing with this pain of somebody looking you in the eye and saying, I never loved you before, you should have known that. And then from there treating you horrible. Like there's even more stories that I can't even get into because like I don't even think it's worth it to just like put everything out there, because I think I've given you enough, and I'll continue to give you more to let you know what it's like to like what I was fighting against and what I was trying to deny. So yeah, like my family looked me in the eye and they're like, don't ever do that again, because that was ridiculously dangerous. I was losing my mind. And I can say that with all honesty. I was losing my mind. I was losing hope. I was extremely depressed and sad. It was like anxious to no end. I had poured myself into work because that was the only thing I could do. I was at a place where my ego was like, you know what? If you don't see my value, I'm gonna give you a giant F you by being successful. And I just had to distract myself by like going hard on my work because the shame and the weight of it was way too much to bear. So don't be like me. Take this as a cautionary tale, and the rest of this series that I'll be doing, this Heartbreak series, is going to go into anecdotes and more stories of like situations that I went through, what I should have done instead, and hopefully you'll take my situation and use it as not just a cautionary tale, but also a pillar of hope. Because with all of that being said, looking back on it now, almost 3 years later from like the complete end of it, I can say that that situation catapulted me into where I am now. I'm not saying I would have never gotten to where I am if I was still in the presence of him, but I can also kind of say yes because I was building my life around what he was building. And anytime I tried to do my own thing that was contrary to that, I didn't receive the support and the love and the smallness that I had. The love that I had for him and the smallness that I had in myself would have made me just conform to fit the mold of what I think he would have wanted me to be. So this was a lot. This was a lot of information. This was a lot of time. Probably gonna be my longest video ever. And I hope that the information I gave you and shared with you gets you thinking. Like, I'm not going to be here and tell you to compare your woes, because that's not what we do here. We don't compare ourselves to limbo. But if you're thinking that your situation is too far gone, if you're thinking that you've wasted too much time, if you're thinking that, like, where do I start from the bottom? I want you to look at me and realize that, like, you're not the only one going through this. There are many people who have gone through this who haven't shared, but I believe that part of my calling, part of my purpose is to share with you this information so that if you're going through it, you don't have to go through it alone. And I'm here for support. I'm here to help you. I'm here to be your virtual friend. Hence why I start off every single episode with saying, hey friend, because I think you guys are my friends, and I am speaking to you from that place of love, the type of love that I have for my friends. So I want to hear your thoughts about this so far. Is there anything in this series that you think I should include? Is there a perspective? Is there any story that you'd want me to elaborate on more? Because if there is, I would love to do that for you and offer you more tips and perspective. But yeah, please share with a friend, leave a comment below, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.